Hello, everyone. Welcome. Um, Scott and I are by no means experts in this. We've been doing this a long time, but I think every year we get better at what we're doing or try new things and whatever. So this is just what what we've come up with so far. And we didn't know exactly, what the audience was going to be today. Have you had experience with this? Is this something new that you've never heard about before? What's going on? So we tried to do a little bit of everything for everyone, and feel free to ask questions or add things as we go through. This is more of I think, a philosophical thing than necessarily nuts and bolts how to, because with only 45 minutes, we don't have a whole lot of time to like dive into that. So this is hopefully start the conversation and get things going. So I'm Bryan Battaglia, and this is Scott Stokes. We both teach in the same district. We actually started teaching, well, he started teaching before me. No offense, Scott. And so we've been doing this for a while. And I think I started changing the way I graded in 2010. And Scott followed a couple years behind me once I convinced him to jump into this thing too. Um, and for me, it was one of those things that I'd struggled with my grading practices every year. And every year at the beginning of the year, I'd rewrite my syllabus and try to figure out how to make my grading fair so that students were getting a grade that was representative of their understanding of science. And the fact that every year I was changing it was telling me that something was off. And it wasn't until I discovered this that I was like, oh my gosh, this is like amazing. Like we grades actually can be meaningful and tell our kids something. Um, so that's what we're talking about today. And basically, I guess, Scott, anything else you want to say to that at the
No,
beginning?
it's spot on. Like Brian said, we together we were always looking for something. I think we came across what Kathy Nunley
Yeah.
and layered curriculum. Um, but it wasn't until Brian found modeling that really coincide with the standards-based grading that it just made sense. It's what we were looking for the best results for our kids.
Yeah. And sticking with the story theme, how does our grading shape our student story? I think it's crucial, right? The feedback that they get from our grading practices can help develop them as a learner and a student, and hopefully taking challenges and taking risks and putting themselves into um, uncomfortable situations. So I think that it's good for everybody to do that. So I guess the foundational principle of this talk is there's no learning in your comfort zone and no comfort in the learning zone. I've encountered this several times. I don't know, but we want our students to get out of their comfortable moments and challenge themselves to do more and be more. And I think that that's probably my biggest takeaway from being a teacher over the last 25 years or whatever it's been, is that I think our superpower is getting kids to believe they're capable of more than they ever thought they could. And that's what I try to do for my students, right? To convince them that they have the tools and the things to stretch outside themselves, but they just have to be willing to take that risk and take that chance. And if our grading system doesn't encourage that, that's a problem, I think. So, we want them to take a leap, right? We want them to trust us to that, hey, this is good. And we tell the kids, you know, you need to put yourself out there. You need to make mistakes. You need to learn from mistakes. And do our grading policies like do that? Do they support that educational philosophy that I want you to make mistakes? But if your mistakes are final, like you make a mistake on an end of unit test, and sorry, that's you didn't learn physics quick enough or chemistry quick enough or whatever we're doing, um, you know, what does that tell your student about them, and what story does that make for them as a scientific thinker? Um, and then why do you grade the way we do? I know that for me, it's how my cooperating teacher graded when I was, going through student teaching, or how my teachers graded when I was in school, because they did it. So that's how it worked, right? How much is tests work? How much is classwork work? How much should group work be? Um, what does that tell us? And does that actually say anything about our students and what they know. And then what do we want our students landing to look like, right? We ask them to make this leap and we want them to end up in a nice, comfortable pile of foam blocks that they can pull back out and jump again and not into a pit of snakes. And well, I guess if you like snakes, that's not the worst thing, but I'll say. Um, yeah, so I feel like this is important for our students to think about that. And it's important for us as educators to think about, what are the things that we say to our students on a daily basis? And then what are the non-spoken things that we tell them too? And I feel like grading is one of those things that's a really big, do what I say, not as I do. And we have this thing there. So that's for me what made me change what I was doing and how I was thinking about this, because I want my students not to feel, um, you know, punished by my grading system, but supported and helped and encouraged by the way that I give them feedback. And I'm going to say less about grading and talk more about feedback at this point anyway, because grading another person I don't like that anyway. I'd rather we just talk about how can we get better? How can we move the conversation about how to make you a better learner and less about a judgment thing. So I work really, really hard with my students to avoid judgment and just, hey, we're all here, we're all learning, and we're all working towards the same thing. So that's the foundation of this. We want our kids to take the leap and jump. So as Scott and I were preparing for this talk, we were talking about what it looks like, and we've both used this thing before. I don't know if you've seen this. This is from Ken O'Connor's Grady for Learning. It's how would you students choose to pack your parachute? This is also the first picture that I use when my parents come for parent-teacher conferences, and I explain my grading policy because they're not used to it. But this is this mythological parachute packing thing, and um, all those kids would get the exact same grade if you average it all together. But clearly, if you look at the different students, there's one I would be more willing to trust to pack my parachute than the others. Um, but what I think was interesting is, they had 7 different tries at this to get better and better and better. And just because the blue parachute packer did not do very well at the beginning, they're killing it towards the end. So, or I guess not killing it as with the context.
Succeeding.
Yeah,
So
how are they testing the packing? Testing it on real people?
I don't know. I don't know, and I don't want to know, really. Yeah. Um,
A good question. I
survivability, I
never thought
suppose.
of that.
Like,
Um,
the red person, they would kill their person right off. They wouldn't ever get to go out the third and fourth try.
yeah, yeah. And were they just lucky the first time and just nailed it, and then I don't know, kind of all over the place. So anyway, this was kind of what we're thinking about, and I think the key to healthy grading is some sort of reassessment. You have to allow kids to be able to make mistakes and and learn from that. Some pushback I've gotten from other teachers is like, well, then they won't study. They'll just go to the test and then learn what they need to know and then take the test. Okay, like, isn't that what we want, right? We teach them kids and then we teach them things and we want them to learn those things. And if it takes me to give an assessment um, before they know what it looks like and know what they want to do, I'm okay with that because I'm going to have some kids that try that just don't know how to do it, and they get better and better as they go through. So what we'd expect is each reassessment they get better um, as they go along. This allows them to learn from the mistakes, which is what we want to do, right? We want to figure out what's going on. How do they know what to do if they don't get feedback on what they're learning from? Um, by the way, nothing I'm saying today I think is like earth-shaking radical, right? I mean, this is formative assessment. We all know that this is something that's important to students and things like that. I think just the timeliness and how we do this is important. And also know that like what I do in my classroom, what Scott does in his classroom, what every person who has changed to this what I call healthy grading policies looks different, right? We're all going to work with what works with you and your personality and your classroom and your students' culture and things like that. But for me, this is the biggest one here. Learning from mistakes, the fact that we're all learners and we're all getting this is huge from me. I want them to make mistakes. I want them to get their assessments back and figure out where they made their mistakes and why they did what they did and came up with it. We'll talk about that coming up. And then student ownership of learning. So putting this on them to figure out what they did wrong and how they are what they're missing on, right? So what I love about how my assess I call my assessments fiestas, by the way, because they're a celebration of learning. It's a dumb thing, but a quiz has a bad connotation. Quizzes are punitive, and I don't like that. So we call them fiestas and celebrations. That's what we do. And then because I teach at an international school, sometimes we call them fetes. Sometimes we call them, I forgot the Japanese word for quiz, but I have it written down somewhere. So I'll switch it out. But what I like about it is the student ownership of learning, it goes to them, right? If they're struggling with, I don't know, velocity versus time graphs, for instance, that's something that they know, ooh, I didn't do well on this. This is something I need to practice and work at and get help from others to do. And it really changes the dynamic from like trying to guess what's in my head to, oh, this is something I struggled with. What am I missing? How am I um, figuring this out? And they really respond well to that. Class culture, like this is the most important thing than anything, I think, for all of us, right? Having a open classroom where kids can support each other and work collaboratively. Um, you know, if a student understands it because their parents are engineers and they've grown up talking math at home and things like that, that does not mean they're a better physics student than the kid who's never seen that before. They just have had experiences that other people haven't had. And so I make sure that that is something we talk about all the time, that just because you don't understand something doesn't mean um, that you're not going to understand it. Actually, one of the things I did over the last few years, I don't know, this came up in a workshop a few years ago about being explicit with my students about confusion and growing comfortable with confusion as a necessary thing for learning and going back to the fundamental thought that, you know, there's no comfort in there's no learning in your comfort zone and there's no comfort in your learning zone. I'm going to expect my students to be uncomfortable and be confused on a daily basis. And just when you start feeling like, oh, I'm starting to get it, I'm going to ratchet up the level of confusion a little bit more because I want to keep you in that zone of learning. And so just even a check-in like, hey, who's confused right now? And all the hands go up. I'm like, perfect. We're right where we need to be. Just keep working at it and it's going to resolve itself. And I think that's huge to value that feeling that our students have and say, hey, it's you're going to be confused. It's okay. I'm here. I got you. We've got each other. We're going to figure this out together and you're going to get it. And that really helps support this because like when I give my fiestas back and the students start looking at what mistakes they made, they're like, it's chaos. They were going all over the classroom, talking to people. What did you have? What did I have? Why is this wrong? Why is this, um, what do I need to do to understand this? And it's like a beautiful thing. And then reflection. I have my students do some reflections on what they did and how they're getting better. We do goal setting as a group too, to like how do we get better at learning and what things can we work on. Um, and those are things that I think are really important for the students to um, see their role in their learning journey and write their story too. So I've done some like reflective blogs with my students over the years. I kind of got away from it this year just because I've been doing some crazy things in my classroom, and so I'm noticing that this year that without doing the reflections, I don't know it's as good as it's been in the past. So this is something I'm working on bringing back in this spring to have the kids do some writing just to themselves. It's not anything I grade. It's just here's the thing. It's an expectation. You're going to do some reflection. And then it's really cool because when they go back and look at a reflection that they made a month prior, they can actually see tangible change in their own thinking and growth. And I think it's a pretty cool thing.
Can you say more about what you do for the goal setting?
Um, so with the way that modeling instruction works for me, you know, I want to do these standard-based grading, but I spend so much time of the first quarter just doing, um, you know, how do we talk to each other? How do we whiteboard? How do we start the discourse, that I don't actually get into a whole lot of content in terms of things that I'm going to assess them on that would be like a physics grade. So actually for the first quarter, I have them do a reflection based on like, what do you do that you think is working well? What are things that you're doing that are like keeping you from learning? You know, what's a skill that you want to work on? We have learner profile traits. It's part of the IB. I teach at an IB school, so I have ninth graders that I'm teaching physics to, and then I also teach juniors and seniors. And so we work a lot with those like those ideas, like being balanced and caring and open-minded and principled and knowledgeable and stuff like that. Risk taker is one of them. So I ask the kids, what do you think that you're strong in, and what are you gonna do to get better? And don't be like, oh, I'm gonna try to do better. Like, no, no, no. It's got to be like a tangible. This is something that I can do, that I'll know that I can check it off when I've done that. Like I'm going to speak in group discussions at least once per day or once per week, something like that, that they can check off and see where they're doing. And then I have them reflect on their goal as we go along. And so after that first big reflection part for them, I get together with each of my students, which takes a lot of my prep time to do. So this is one of those things that like I'm willing to do this because I think it's worth it for the kids. But I will sit down with each kid and have a one-on-one conversation about, what do you think your grade should be from first quarter? What's your evidence for that? Why do you think things are going to happen? And then we decide on their grade for the first quarter, because I just haven't had a chance to do standards with them. And then second quarter, we'll get into the standards, and then the grade comes based on that. And then the semester kind of gets a hodgepodge of that. But once we've started that conversation with the kids, it makes it really easy to have a conversation going forward, especially with the students who really need it. So, yeah, so that's basically what it looks like in my class. And I know it's pretty similar in Scott's class. Although I think that our methods of reassessment are a little bit different. Um, do you want to talk a little bit about that, Scott? What you do?
Yeah, I'm in a middle school, so well, a lot of this idea is new for these kids. In some cases, it's a culture shock. I've gotten about 20% of my building to switch to some form of the style of grading. So some of the kids are getting, used to the idea of reassessing. For me, I've stole this from somebody else. I have a Microsoft form that they fill out. They have to tell me what was their clearly defined mistake, what's the standard they want to reassess on. Just so when I read it, I know that they're ready to reassess. I don't want kids coming in just throwing spaghetti at the wall, see if a higher score will stick. Just by reading this little form. And I set up certain days, and I have my prep time available during their lunch hours, so they can come down and reassess. Sometimes I have to do it before school, but pretty much just making sure that they're prepared. That's the biggest thing. The beginning of that starts with the actual day they get their assessment back. I call it pass back day. And I tell them, I go, this is more important than the day you take the test, because now you have to look at all the reflection and all the feedback that I've given. I never mark anything wrong. There's no percent, there's no grade. It's just feedback with a bunch of questions on it. They have to internalize that, figure out what they did, look at their rubric score for the standard, talk with their group. A lot of collaboration goes on during that day. So it's works out really positive for the kids that follow exactly what I have in place for them to do that. It's taken me a while to get here. This is not something that I established overnight. It took me about 6 years to develop that, but it's very positive for the kids. They really like it, especially in middle school. I hear the kids that have test anxiety. I don't hear that in my class. I don't hear that from parents. they're not a good test taker. I was like, well, they know the material. They should be able to do pretty well in the test, but the anxiety goes away because they know they have an opportunity for reassessment. So that's a big help for the kids at my level.
Same at mine too, because I have students that will, as we're sitting down to take an assessment, they're like, "I'm really nervous. Can I reassess if I don't do well on this?" I'm like, "Always. Like that's my thing. You can do that." So, and then they sit down and they do fine on it because they they actually do understand it. They just don't know. Yeah, I think that what I liked most about switching to this was the conversation of what can I do to get an A like disappeared overnight. It's not like what can I do to get an A? It's I'm struggling with velocity versus time graphs. I'm struggling with, momentum conservation. Can you help me with that? Or I don't understand how I'm labeling my force diagrams incorrectly. Can you help me with that? I'm like, absolutely. That is a conversation I'm here for all day because now you're actively seeking some learning. I Scott and I we sat down to present this and realized that we grade our fiestas completely different. He writes all these long comments and things like that to help the kids think. I just mark questions wrong, and then it's up to them to figure out why it got marked wrong. And so they go and look at other students and figure out, wait, why is yours wrong, right, but mine is wrong? And sometimes they find my grading inconsistencies or like, wait, you said that this is okay. And I'm like, oh, well, I make mistakes too. Sorry. You know, it happens as I'm going through a whole bunch of them. But I love it because I grade on a scale of 3. So a 3 is mastery. That's good enough for me. 2 is you're on in process, but you're not quite there yet. 1, you're really struggling with it. A 0 is they left it blank. So that doesn't really do anything for me. So on their Fiesta, I'll have like the standards listed up top, and I just give them a score based on that um, Fiesta what their score was. So they'll have like 3, 2, 1. So if they know, okay, they got a 1 on this standard, that's something that they definitely need to go and get coached up on. And everyone in my class is, if you got all 3s, you don't get to sit there and just go, look at me, I'm Mr. No, no, no. You're coaching other people. You're figuring things out and helping them learn what's going on. So that everyone is engaged. And the expectation is if you don't have all 3s, you should have whole bunch of stuff written on your Fiesta by the end of this time, notes to yourself on what you've done wrong, preferably in a different color so you know what is your new thinking as opposed to the old thinking. Um, that reflection and that feedback is very important to them. So I have to make sure that they um, work through that. Erska, if I said that correctly, I'm
Yes,
sorry.
you did.
Okay.
You mentioned that you work at an IB school,
Yes.
but the grading you've just described doesn't sound like IB grading, at least as I know it. And so I'm curious as to how you make that work because I really like what you're describing, but it doesn't. I also teach at an IB school. It
Yeah,
doesn't
yeah.
really fit into that system. And so I'm curious, how do you get from where you are to making that work in whatever your school is doing?
Yeah, and that is the thing I think Scott and I are still trying to figure out, 20 years later, 15 years later, how to do that. How does this information translate to like a letter grade that I have to give the kid at the end of the quarter and things like that? So I've come up with a it's basically a flow chart for my students, right?
Mhm.
So here are the standards that we're responsible for this quarter. Do you have 3s in do you have more 3s than 2s? Okay, cool. Then you're going to be on this pathway of an A. And then I have a percentage, like I don't remember what it is right now. I think it's like 70% 3s over 2s, that's an A. And then if you're less than that, it goes through. And then if you have any 1s, you can't get an A if you have a 1 in anything, because that means you learned nothing on one of the topics. You have to have at least a 2 in everything. But I don't have an expectation of all 3s. So we're going to have something in there. And then it goes from that. I should have probably put that in the slide, but I don't have the picture of that right now. But you just kind of have to do something that works for you. And I talked with the kids developing this a while ago on what seems fair and what's going through that. And so when kids are like, "What's my grade?" I'm like, "Go look at the flow chart. You figure it out. I'm not a human calculator, and I have no need like." I do not care about that. Learn the standards and you'll have an A. That's all you need to know. So kind of where I go. Obviously, you have to have administrators who are supportive of this to do this type of thing. My administration has been supportive. Parents, I mean, so this is, I guess we'll go into the next part because this your question kind of leads into that, how to implement this without going crazy. Because, well, if I'm going to allow reassessments, then how many different quizzes and tests do I have to make, and how can things, how do I do this? It's going to be different. Some people are going to make it work for you, and you don't have to necessarily. I think as teachers, we want to have a complete, polished plan before we implement. And it was kind of crazy because I took my first modeling workshop the summer of 2010, and as soon as the workshop was done, I was like, why isn't school starting tomorrow? I'm like, I was so excited and re-energized to like go back into the classroom and like, oh my gosh, this is the way I should have been teaching my whole life. I'm like, I want to start now. And it's like that when Harry met Sally moment at the end, like, when you find that you want to do this for the rest of your life, you want the rest of your life to start now. That kind of was a moment for me for the modeling workshop. So of course I'm going through and I'm searching the internet, and this standard-based grading kept popping up, and I was like, wow, this is really cool, but I can't start. There's no way I can start teaching using modeling instruction and completely revamp my grading policy in the same year. That would be really dumb. I'm not going to do that. And that lasted into November. And I was like, I can't not grade this way because, I'd have kids that, struggled with kinematic equations in September, but were knocking them out like a champ in November. And I'm like, how unfair is it that you got a C in first quarter because you weren't able to do the thing that you can clearly do now? That doesn't seem right to me. So, I started exploring my district's grade change policies. There's a form. You can just turn it in. And I was like, well, cool. Then this kid deserves an A for first quarter because they can do the things that I want them to do in first quarter now. So it's not their fault that they didn't know it until November. Like I need to be a better teacher maybe or whatever. So I do a lot of things, but it was a slow process. Like what am I willing to do now? Like how am I going to do this? Okay, I don't know that I want to go to all standards, but I'm going to let them like reassess on the main ideas and things like that and figure what that needs to be. So that's something that you're going to have to do. What are you willing to do? How much time are you going to give to reassessment? Do you want to reassess all the kids together? As a general rule, I kind of do, once like 80% of my kids have mastered a standard, then those questions come off my fiestas, and then it's one of those things that they can come and reassess when they need to. But usually I'll try to give an assessment on a standard 2 to 3 times before it actually like hits my grade book anyway, to give them chance to get feedback and do that. Because the other thing I don't want is I don't want to put in a whole bunch of low standards in my grade book and have parents calling up going, I work in a school where a lot of helicopter parents are there who, are monitoring the grade book. And as soon as a low score pops up, they're yelling at their kid and calling the school going, why does my kid need tutoring? I'm like, no, your kid just started a unit. They don't know anything yet. They have to figure it out. And I want to shield my kids from that too. So, like if we're having a problem, I will definitely talk to the parents and say, hey, this kid is struggling with standards and is not coming to reassess. And that is something that I will definitely communicate. But for some of the, upper helicopter parents of my population, I have to advocate for them too. So I do some different things to make it work for my population, and you'll have to do it too.
Hmm.
Eat the elephant, right? That is a monumental, overwhelming task to try to eat an elephant. So you just have to go one bite at a time. I'm sorry, that's maybe a horrible thing, but right, you eat an elephant one bite at a time, right? And then eventually you've consumed the whole thing, but you can't do it all at once. If I just look at, oh my gosh, I have so much to eat, I'm not going to. But I just start, and it gets easier and easier as you go along. For the record, I've never actually eaten elephant. I don't, just so you know. Um, Pick your battles, right? with the IB curriculum, there's so many standards. With NGSS, there's so many standards. There's so many things. I'm not assessing the kids on every single thing that's going towards a grade. I'm going to figure out what are my 4 or 5, 6 things for each unit that I think is the quintessential. If they master this, that's good. Do I expect them to learn the other things too? Yeah, hopefully they're going to get that as well. But what are the key elements that I want to do? Because if I have 20 standards that I'm trying to assess my kids on, that's unwieldy. It's overwhelming for everyone. There's no way that I can write 20 standards and assess 3 times every time. It's not going to work. So I pick my battles. I pick what are the things that I want to do. How did I get into that, right? Maybe it's a couple things that I want to work on at the very beginning, um, and go from there. Um, More small assessments. So I very rarely do like end of unit things. I've almost gotten to the point where like every assessment is a formative assessment, and because like why? I don't understand the point of a summative. If the goal is I want my students to learn, that learning should never have an expiration date. Sorry, it's January now. You can no longer learn first quarter stuff or first semester stuff. I want my students to be learning all the time and things. Now, there are restrictions. So my administrator really wants me to do grade changes no less than a quarter after. So like, by the end of third quarter, second quarter's grade should be finalized. So I tell the students like, look, I want to give you as much time as I can, but we have restrictions. So you have kind of a timeline on when to work on those things, because that's just what my administration will be willing to support. But what I like about having the small assessments, these little fiestas, like it's usually a single page, 3 or 4 questions, whatever. I can get it. I can score it really quickly, get it back to them on the next day or 2 days later. They do the feedback. They learn a whole bunch. I mean, honestly, like Scott was saying, pass back day is the best 15, 20 minutes of my class. It's where they're actually engaged and like, oh, why is this wrong? I thought this was right. And they get that feedback. They get coaching up from their students, from their peers. And to avoid the big line to me to ask me what they did wrong, I have a policy. It's ask 3, then me. So you have to talk to 3 other students. And if you still can't figure out what's going on, then you can come talk to me. And so then I usually have 1 or 2 kids that are talking to me because most of the time they figure out what they did wrong after they talk to 3 different students.
Can I ask, none of that's graded, right? The grading is coming on the fiestas you give. So all this is them learning, and they don't turn it back in and say, here's the improvement I made. You just see it
Correct.
next time they do something that they've learned it and they're just better at it the next things you do. Is that right?
Absolutely. This is how do you get better, because I'm going to give an assessment in 2 days and you're going to get a chance to show me what you've done better. So 100% of my score of my classroom grade is based on assessments. I don't give points for group work. I don't give points for, are you working at your table? I don't give points for do you do homework? Right? That's a whole other conversation. If I don't give points for homework, why do kids do homework? Because they have figured out that doing homework makes them do better on the assessments, right? If they don't practice, uh, practice makes better. That's what I tell my students all the time. So if you do not practice, you will not get better.
Do you give feedback on the homework?
Um, yeah, usually what I do is first of all, I don't give a whole lot of homework. I've read many, many, many books on this, the homework myth and different things like that, that says that there is really no um, connection between homework and achievement. And I think a lot of it has to do that the homework has to be meaningful to the student, or else they're just going through the motion and not actually doing anything. And so students assigning themselves homework and saying, hey, you know what? I'm really struggling with adding vectors, and I'll get some feedback on that. So they'll do the homework for those things. And then usually what we'll do is we'll talk about it in class the next day. We'll have some small group work, do some problems and things like that. And once that becomes part of your culture, the kids really start to take that on. But I want them to do 15 minutes of physics homework because they feel they need 15 minutes of physics homework, not because I've assigned the problem. right? Like that was one of my frustrations when I was in school and my math teacher would give me 30 problems to do. That was the same problem that after I did three, I'm like, I get it. I understand the pattern now. Now it's just busy work. Um, and some of my students feel that way. And some of it's those 30 problems, they can't even get through the three because they don't know it. So the goal is let's change the narrative. Let's change the way that we do things so that you not understanding how to do something does not mean there's something wrong about you. It just means that we need some more coaching and we need some more help. And I feel that students respond to that. When they start talking about we should get points for homework, I'm like, okay, well, who's on like a basketball team? And they're like, I am. Cool. If you go to practice every day, they're like, yeah. I'm like, why? I'm like, well, because it makes us better. Okay, cool. So when you go to the game, how many points do you start with because you went to practice all week? And they're like, what? I'm like, well, how many points do you get in a game because you went to practice and you practiced your dribbling? And they're like, none. I'm like, okay, so why does it make sense for school to get like the practice is how you get better, so you do good in the game. The
Kind of a
homework is,
learning process.
yeah, yeah.
How often do you give assessments?
I try to at least once a week. We're on a block scheduling, so it makes it a little bit weird. So I try to do it every 2 or 3 classes, but they're short, right? They're like 10, 15 minutes where they take it. And because there's only 2 or 3 questions. So it does not take up my whole hour. Um, and I have a rule. I take the Fiesta myself and then I multiply the time it takes me by 4, and that's how much I give the kids to do it. So that kind of the timing and timing is part of it too. Like I don't sit there all day on it. So you have this long, and if you don't know it in that amount of time, then you don't know it yet, and that's fine. We're just going to work and you're going to get some feedback and then we'll try again. Involve the parents, right? If parents don't know what you're doing, that is a big part of it. My open house pretty much is predominantly about my grading policy, so they know what's gone on. No parent that I've talked to that has come to me about this system leaves going, that's the dumbest thing I've ever heard. They're all like, oh my gosh, that makes so much sense. Why doesn't everybody teach this way? And then I say, I'm trying. I have a lot of teachers in my building that are very uh, close to what I do or do some sort of standard-based grading and reassessment thing for sure. Because I think it goes really well with our philosophy of the school and also of what we're trying to do. But definitely, if the parents aren't aware of what's going on, it makes it tougher. So I would say do that. Um, and then don't fear the mess, right? Again, we expect to our students to take risks, to do things, to be okay with not being perfect yet. And I think as teachers, there's kind of pressure that we have to be perfect all the time or have something completely established. I tell my students all the time, like we're trying something new. This might go very badly, but we're going to try it and we're going to see how it goes and get some feedback. And if we want our students to be okay with us making or with them making mistakes and not being perfect, then we have to show them that. We have to model that for our students too, that like, hey, yeah, we're going to try some new things and we're going to step outside of our comfort zone. And I'm constantly trying things with my students that I'm like, yeah, I just thought of this last block and I'm thinking it might work out, but let's see what happens. So um, we'll try to figure it out together. We'll experiment and we'll come up with some cool things. So yeah, I did not have a fully fleshed out idea of what this was going to look like before I started using it in my classroom. I was just trying to like figure out what works and what makes it a little bit better.
Have you ever thought about ungrading?
Yeah, I mean, I would love to my students know my opinion on grades that I feel like grades are probably the worst thing that's ever happened to education because you can either think about learning or you can think about the game of school. And I think that's what a lot of kids that come into my classroom, the kids that are most frustrated with the way that I score things are my students that really got good at the game of school. I'm just going to do these things. I'm going to jump through the hoops. I'm going to get my A. I don't actually have to learn anything. I just have to like memorize everything, regurgitate it for the test, and then I'm going to move on with my life. And that doesn't work. That doesn't work in my classroom. Like you have to understand things and you have to know it. And I'm going to bring standards back that you haven't seen in a while because they're still needed. Like, especially with physics, the things that we do at the beginning of the year get used the rest of the time. So it's nice to see that with the students.
Hmm.
What's Goodhart's law? Goodhart's law.
So that's I put that in there. It's basically somebody is formal way of what you said.
Gotcha.
Goodhart's law is an adage often stated as when a measure becomes a target, it ceases to be a good measure. Right.
Gotcha.
So how do I know I'm learning? Oh, well, I'll give you grades. So then right, then the focus goes off of learning and goes to grades. It's
Right.
the more fancy way is any observed statistical regularity will tend to collapse once pressure is placed upon it for control purposes. That's the fancy
Gotcha.
jargon.
Gotcha. Yeah, and I think that has been the issue that I've had with grades too. And I mean, this goes back to the beginning of my teaching career when Scott and I were talking about how to do this and how to grade our more traditional way, right? Was like, how does, a B in my class does not necessarily match a B in somebody else's class teaching the same subject because we do something different. And I'm not saying that a B in my class looks the same as a B in Scott's class now just because we're doing this grading process. But what I do know is that I have data that I can give to parents or I can show to the students and say, look at your growth. Here you had ones and twos and now you have twos and threes and you're progressing in the thing. I give them a chart that they keep track of in their notebooks that has every time they get assessed, they mark the chart down so they can see exactly what things they're learning and what things they need to work on. And again, that goes to them. So when it comes down to the time, I'm like, hey, do you guys have something that you need to practice tonight? And they're like, yep. I'm like, okay, let's spend 10, 15 minutes practicing physics tonight. Figure out what things you're struggling with and work through it. And if you need help, come in and ask questions.
Hmm.
So,
How do they decide what to practice then? Do they come to you and say, or what do they use as resources, I guess, for figuring out what they can use to practice effectively?
so yeah, I put a lot of, so usually if I give them some of like the modeling resources or things like that, I don't usually do all the questions. I usually do 2 or 3 questions here or there that we work together. So there's always additional questions that we didn't go over that they're free to work through. I also post lots of things to my online agenda, so additional practice things. So I throw other things out there if there's anything that they need to work on. So there are places that they can go and get some more help with that. But usually it's, they look at their previous assessments. I'm like, okay, this is, what things you struggled with on the last assessment. It's going to be on the next assessment. What do you need to do to get better at that? Let's practice those problems or practice what you need to do. And they realized, a lot of the problems that I make up, they can just make up a question, right? If it's an object that's moving, just make it up and see what you can come up with. And I encourage them, they're more than welcome to bring in their work or their practice, and I will check it over and give them some feedback on it. So um, it becomes a lot more conversational. It becomes a lot more a productive discussion between, guide and learner rather than, you know, me meeting out judgment on them. Uh, it's a lot more healthy relationship.
Would you say you know more about what your kids know now than when you graded traditionally?
Oh, yeah. Yeah. I hated like when I can think back to when I first started and I was teaching traditionally and the parents would come in for parent teacher conferences and they're like, what can I do to help my kid has a B, and I'd be like, well, they didn't do so well on tests, so maybe study more. Like that's not helpful. What does that tell you? And now they come in and I can look at my grade book and I'm like, well, they're really struggling with, you know, these three things, they really need to work on that, and that would really help them to understand what's going on. And here are the resources that they can go through. And we've talked about this, and you know, this other student who sits at their table has been really good at this, and that might be a good place for them to reach out to get some collaboration. So it's a completely different discussion.
Can you talk about your assessments then? Are they basically what they've seen in class and you just change the numbers or the characteristics, you make a positive slope, a negative slope, or can you just talk about how similar your assessments are to things they've been doing or practicing?
Yeah, I mean, I don't try to trick them. Definitely my IB students, my juniors and seniors, I write more challenging questions for them because IBO loves to change things up, and so they need to be prepared for that. But especially for my freshmen, I'm really worried about them getting the basic concepts down and things like that. And so I don't try to do, um, like if the standard is you can draw and label a qualitative force diagram, then that's what you're going to do on the exam. You're going to do that, and I'm going to have you, should forces be balanced or unbalanced based on our rules? Okay, so an object is speeding up to the left. What should the force diagram look like? Speeding up to the right. I don't give it, anything tricky. I'm just like, can you do it? Can you label them correctly? Okay, cool. Then you have mastery on that standard. And if not, then that's fine. We've got some problems. That'll be something you need to work through and figure out what's going on. So again, it's like two or three questions, you know, very few times do I give something that covers like every standard of the unit. It's usually just a couple standards and then we move on and I mix it up a little bit as we go through. Um, my reassessment is usually a similar thing, but maybe, I usually make multiple versions of it because my kids are sitting like right on top of each other. So I have, two or three quizzes that I give out anyway. Um, and so I have other varieties that the kids can come in. If they took a version A, I'll give them a version B or whatever. Or I'll just make a slightly different one. And I have two or three assessments pretty much for each set of standards that I've done. I did not make those all in 1 year, right? I made one and then I had a reassessment, and then the next year I made another reassessment or whatever I need to do. So you don't have to do a ton. Um, and then it gets to a point where I'm out and I'm like, okay, this is the third time that you've reassessed and you still don't know it. So now you're going to come up and you're going to show me what you've learned. So sometimes my reassessments just become a conversation. Okay, here, come up with a problem. Show me that you can do it. Right. And my philosophy is this, and I tell the kids like, if I said, do you know soccer? Do you like soccer? And they're like, yes. And I said, okay, so tell me about soccer. Like I can know in a conversation if you know anything that you're talking about or not. And if you don't know, then I'm like, yeah, you're not really a soccer fan. You don't know anything about it yet. So um, I don't have a problem with the kids coming in and we just do like it doesn't necessarily have to be a traditional thing. Just show me that you understand that. Show me that you can walk me through it and we'll have a couple questions. And to be honest, that's even better because the kids can articulate exactly what they mean. Um, and so it's better. Not every reassessment needs to be paper and pencil.
Mhm. How many kids do you have in your freshman physics in each
Uh,
class?
Usually around 30, 30.
30 kids. That's quite a
Yeah.
lot.
Yeah.
Do you ever do the reassessments in groups?
All of my assessments are solo because if I do group reassessments, I don't know if that knowledge is theirs or if that is
Mhm.
the group's knowledge. Now, they will go over their assessments. They will talk about things. I'll have them do problems together as a group so they can learn. But, that's one of the things, and it kind of goes with the culture building, is the students know that they're going to be responsible for the learning. So if
Mhm.
they're sitting in a group and one person's doing all the work, they're not really learning anything from that. So
So while you're reassessing somebody, that the rest of the class is working on in groups, is that right?
usually what I'll do is I'll do reassessments either at lunch or during my prep period or something
Oh,
that they'll come in. I don't do
oh,
a whole lot of reassessments individual during class because my attention is making sure
oh,
that everyone's
right.
working through.
Okay.
Um,
Okay, at
but
lunch.
some kids have issues with getting rides or whatever. So, you know, before and after school doesn't work for everybody. But
Mhm.
my school is pretty accommodating because we have a lot of different things. Our culture is we have like houses, kind of like Harry Potter. So we have all the kids are in a different house. Croc house is ours. So we have 6 different houses, and each kid in each grade has a advisor who's like one of the staff members. So I have 5 kids from each grade that are like my advisees, and we have meetings with them once a quarter. So there's already kind of this idea that students can leave class to go have a meeting with a teacher or things like that. That's kind of expected. Um, and so I'll have students that'll just come in during one of my free blocks and we'll do some reassessment there.
Mhm.
The question about individuals versus groups, I had a question related to that. So, you're doing modeling. Is
Mhm.
it, can you say a little bit, is it centered around group whiteboard work, or is it lots of different various things? Is it whole class conversation, or do students groups present a whiteboard at the front and the rest of the class looks at it? And the question I'm trying to get at is, um, how much responsibility does each individual have to their group, right? So if there's a kid who's really lagging behind, um, I'm not sure what I'm trying to say there, but right, like how much does the class have to sort of move somewhat together? Because as you said, in physics, everything builds, right? So if you're trying
Right.
to do a complicated force question, and you can't even do the kinematics that tells you what the acceleration is, right? To tell you if it's accelerating or not, then that's going to really drag your group down. And so I'm just curious about that kind of dynamic, if that makes sense.
Yeah. I that kind of goes along with the culture thing. Like, I'll have some students that try to do everything, and so I will pull them aside and say, "Hey, you're doing too much. Like, you're not helping. You're just giving all the answers, and nobody's learning. You need to be more like me and ask questions." So I try to get some of my high flyers to model better coaching practices. Right? How can we I have a shirt that I wear that says, I can explain it to you, but I can't understand it for you. And so that's kind of one of the philosophies I have as well is like, you can explain something to somebody, but they're not going to know what you did or what things that what choices you made in that. So you really need to get better at asking questions and communicating and doing that. Collaboration is also a very big thing in our school. So, and that's again something I do explicitly. I have them do little questionnaires. How are you? There's a book called Deep Learning. Deep Deep Learning, I think, is where I got, and they have a whole bunch of little quizzes that I've adapted so my students look into, what does that mean to be a collaborator? What does that mean to be a communicator? What does that mean? How do I include everybody in our discussions and things like that? So those are things that are part of the culture of the classroom that is needed to make this be effective as well. Yeah, that's it. Deep learning, engage the world, change the world. Um, so we are, perfect. Yeah, and so some interesting things in that book, for sure. But I really like the little self-assessment quizzes that I can do with the kids, and they have some student-friendly versions because the like actual versions are like half the words I don't know what they mean, but the student versions are pretty close to what's going on. So yeah, it just becomes everyone helps everyone, and we realize that you know, if someone doesn't understand things, they need additional attention. But here's the thing, I know because I see the assessments, I know what kids need more
Mhm.
help than other kids because I know exactly what they know because I've given these assessments. So like, I had one kid that I've been working with because he's just been bombing all of his fiestas. I'm like, this is not going to work. We gotta get to the heart of this. And so I've spent a lot more time working with him because he needs the extra support and the extra help, whereas a lot of the other students are kind of learning from each other and getting more confident
So are they working in small groups and doing whiteboard stuff, or is it's
all
mostly?
every day. They work together, they're communicating, and I'm going around monitoring the groups and making sure that people are, you know, all part of the inclusion. Like there are some kids that I have said, okay, you don't get to touch a marker today because you've been doing too much lately. So how are you going to get, your ideas on the board without telling them what to write and you don't get to write. So try to get that. So, but I feel like, I think that's one of the things too, as a teacher, I used to do a lot of, hey, class, we all need to do this when I saw one or two kids doing the problem, and I realized that that's not helpful. I need to go up to the student and be direct and say, hey, you know, that was shoot, what was the name of the book? I don't know, I'll think of it. But one of them was talking about how to give feedback, and a good way to give feedback is when you do this, this happens. Oh, I think we were supposed to go back to room one. I just realized it's like almost 1 o'clock.
Good
Oops.
conversation.
Um, oh, it is 1 o'clock. All right. Um, yeah, but basically, like when you do this, this is the result of that action. So, when you write everything on the whiteboard, it seems like a lot of the other group members are not getting as much from the experience. And doing that, this is what you're doing, and this is the result of that. And that's been a lot more a positive effect on my students in getting them to work collaboratively. It's a process, right? The kids are not going to be perfect at everything, just like we're not perfect at everything, and we have to model and authentically challenge their thinking, to make improvements in those things.
Yeah. If you remember the name of that book, you can send it to the people to send out to the
Yeah,
listeners.
it's intentional interruption. That's the name of it.
Intentional
Intentional interruption. And I don't remember the author offhand, but I have it on my Kindle somewhere.
Okay. Do you do whole class discussions at all?
Oh yeah, Yeah.
Centered around their whiteboard work?
usually yes. And so usually what I'll do is I'll assign two groups the same problem to whiteboards so that we have a critical competitor, and then they'll see what's different about the different boards, and we'll get into a discussion. And I encourage the kids who talk a lot to talk less, and the kids who don't talk to talk more.
Katz and Dak are the two authors.
Okay. Thank you.
It's been
All
super
right.
helpful. This has been really, really wonderful. Thank you so much.
Awesome.
Yes.
The last thing, there is a Discord, AMTA Discord. I don't know if you guys have that. Let's see, can I drop those into the chat?
Mm.
Um, but if you go to the Discord, there's a standard-based grading chat in Discord, and there's lots of people that are there. There's also a lot of standard-based grading groups on Facebook and things that I belong to.
Hmm.
There's a tons of resources out there for it. But you have our emails. Feel free to reach out to us. I'm willing to have this discussion all the time. I'm very passionate about it. So, whatever I can do to help.
Great.
Nice.
No. Thank
Awesome.
you.
Well, thanks everyone. It was nice to see you here, and hopefully our paths cross again in the near future.
Yes, sir. Thank you.
All right.